The red dust of Kepler 442b swirled around Tom Fletcher's boots as he settled into his weathered chair on the porch. The wind carried that metallic smell it always did at night, mixing with the scent of the coffee cooling in his mug. At 84 years old, Tom had learned to appreciate these quiet moments. They were rare enough in a life like his. He'd been a Marine once. A young man who thought he understood what courage meant. 3 wars had taught him differently. 3 wars had shown him that real courage wasn't charging into battle. It was waking up the next morning and choosing to keep living. Choosing to find beauty in a universe that seemed determined to show you only ugliness. His wife Linda had understood that. She'd been the one who first read him poetry, back when they were young and foolish and thought they'd live forever. She'd passed 2 years ago, leaving Tom alone on the frontier colony's edge. Most folks lived in the main settlement, clustered together for safety and company. But Tom preferred the quiet. Preferred the space to think and remember. The twin moons began their climb over the horizon. The larger one glowed silver, bright enough to read by. The smaller one followed close behind, casting everything in warm amber light. When they rose together like this, the colonists called it the full moon. Something about the gravitational pull made people act strange, they said. Made animals restless. Made the night feel different somehow. Tom didn't believe in superstitions, but he had to admit the light was beautiful. It reminded him of Linda's eyes in certain moods, gray and gold at the same time. He opened his battered book, the pages soft from years of handling. The spine had cracked long ago. He'd read these poems 1,000 times, but they never got old. Linda had given him this book 40 years ago, told him that words could heal wounds that medicine couldn't touch. She'd been right about that, like she'd been right about most things. His gravelly voice carried across the empty wastes as he began reciting Tennyson. I cannot rest from travel. I will drink life to the lees. The words felt good in his mouth. Strong. Defiant. The old poet understood what it meant to keep going when everything told you to stop. To keep searching when you'd already lost so much. That's when he saw them. 2 pairs of glowing yellow eyes emerged from the darkness beyond his porch. They caught the moonlight and reflected it back, bright and steady. Tom's hand tensed slightly, but he didn't stop reading. He'd been a Marine long enough to know that showing fear was the worst thing you could do. The creatures moved into the amber moonlight, and Tom got his first clear look at them. They stood barely 3 feet tall, compact and powerful. They looked like wolves at first glance, but wrong in all the important ways. Their fur shimmered silver blue, catching the light like brushed metal. 6 legs carried them forward with a grace that made Tom's skin prickle. These things moved like water, smooth and inevitable. Their ears twitched with every syllable he spoke. Their heads tilted, first one way then the other, as if trying to understand not just the sounds but the meaning behind them. Tom knew exactly what they were. He'd seen the intelligence reports 3 weeks ago when Colonel Davis had made his rounds. Vex scouts. Advance reconnaissance for an invasion force. They'd hit 4 colonies already, burned them to nothing, killed every human they found. Efficient. Ruthless. Unstoppable. The reports said they communicated through sounds humans couldn't hear. Said they hunted in packs and never left survivors. Said they were probably watching the colony right now, gathering data, preparing for the attack. And here were 2 of them, standing 15 feet from Tom's porch, listening to him read poetry. He should have been terrified. Should have been reaching for the pulse rifle leaning just inside his door. Should have been running or screaming or doing something other than sitting in his chair like an old fool. But Tom didn't move. He simply turned the page with steady fingers and kept reading. Come, my friends. 'Tis not too late to seek a newer world. The smaller Vex took 1 step closer. Its crystalline fur caught the moonlight and scattered it in tiny rainbow fragments. Then it took another step. And another. Until it was close enough that Tom could see its breath misting in the cool night air. The larger one followed, slower but just as deliberate. They both sat down in the dust of his garden, their 6 legs folding beneath them in a way that looked almost comfortable. Their yellow eyes never left his face. Tom kept reading. He read through the nervousness that made his hands want to shake. He read through the absurdity of the situation. He read because Linda had taught him that sometimes the only thing you could do was hold on to the beautiful things and refuse to let darkness steal them away. The hours passed. The twin moons climbed higher, shifted, began their descent toward the opposite horizon. Tom's voice grew hoarse, but he didn't stop. He read poem after poem, turning pages that rustled softly in the night wind. When dawn finally broke, painting the red dust gold and pink, Tom closed his book. He looked directly at the 2 Vex scouts who had sat motionless through the entire night. Tomorrow night if you're interested, he said simply. Then he stood, joints creaking, picked up his empty coffee mug and walked inside. He shut the door with a soft click and locked it out of habit, though he suspected locks wouldn't mean much if the Vex decided to attack. Through his window, he watched them sit there for another 10 minutes, heads tilted toward his door. Then they turned and vanished into the morning shadows, moving like liquid mercury across the dust. Tom set his book on the kitchen table and started making breakfast. His hands shook slightly as he cracked eggs into the pan. Not from fear exactly. From something else. Something that felt almost like hope, though he couldn't explain why. The galaxy's most feared predators had sat in his garden all night, listening to poetry. And they were coming back. Inside the cloaked scout ship buried beneath the red dunes, the two Vex struggled with something they'd never experienced before. Confusion. The ship's interior hummed with the familiar sounds of their technology, but nothing felt familiar anymore. Rix paced back and forth on his 6 legs, wearing a path in the metal floor. His designation was Scout Unit 7 Rix, and in his 12 years of service he'd never failed to file a complete tactical report. Until now. Nyla sat at the communication console, her claws hovering over the controls. She was Scout Unit 7 Nyla, slightly smaller than Rix but faster in combat situations. Her record was flawless. 63 successful reconnaissance missions across 9 different worlds. Commander Vorn's voice crackled through their neural link, that direct mind-to-mind connection that all Vex shared within their units. His irritation came through as a sharp frequency that made both their ears flatten. Report status immediately. I need defensive positions. Weapon placements. Guard rotations. Human weaknesses. Rix forced himself to stop pacing. He had to say something. Through the neural link he transmitted carefully, the target showed no fear response. He continued his auditory pattern despite our presence. There was a pause. Then Vorn's voice came back, crackling with barely contained anger. Pattern? What pattern? Explain your terminology, 7 Rix. Nyla joined the link, her thoughts joining with Rix's. They'd been partners for 8 years and could communicate faster together than separately. Sir, the frequency resonance the human created, it produced a compulsion effect. We couldn't attack. Couldn't move. Something in our ancestral memory cores activated. The silence that followed felt heavy, dangerous. Commander Vorn wasn't known for his patience with unusual reports. He wanted facts. Numbers. Tactical advantages. Not vague descriptions of feelings and compulsions. Explain immediately, Vorn finally transmitted, and both scouts could feel the threat behind those words. But how could they explain something they didn't understand themselves? Rix tried to access his memory files from the previous night, but they didn't make sense. The human's voice had triggered something deep in his brain, in sections that weren't supposed to activate during normal operations. Parts of his mind that the medical scans said were dormant. Useless evolutionary remnants. For 3,000 years, the Vex had been perfect weapons. Their ancestors had been engineered by a civilization whose name was lost to history. Designed to be soldiers. Scouts. Killers. Every aspect of their biology had been refined through centuries of conquest and warfare. They didn't question. Didn't hesitate. Didn't feel anything except the satisfaction of a completed mission. Except last night Rix had felt something else. Something that made his crystalline fur vibrate in patterns he'd never experienced before. Something that made him want to stay in that human's garden forever, just listening. He couldn't report that. Vorn would declare them compromised and recall them immediately. Possibly decommission them. Rix had seen it happen to other scouts who showed signs of malfunction. We require additional observation time, Nyla transmitted finally. The human may reveal defensive weaknesses through repeated behavior patterns. It was a weak excuse and they all knew it. But Vorn didn't recall them. Instead he transmitted, 24 hours. Then I expect a complete tactical analysis. Commander Vorn out. The neural link went quiet. Rix and Nyla looked at each other, their yellow eyes meeting in the dim light of the scout ship. We're going back tonight, Rix said aloud, not through the link. Speaking with their actual voices was something they rarely did. It felt more private somehow. More real. I know, Nyla replied. Her translator chip converted her harmonic frequencies into human speech, though there were no humans present to hear it. I've been thinking about it all day. About his voice. About the patterns in the sounds. Me too, Rix admitted. It's like remembering something I never knew I forgot. That evening, as the twin moons began their rise, both scouts emerged from beneath the dunes and made their way back to Tom Fletcher's homestead. They moved more cautiously this time, fully aware that they were making a choice that went against their training. against their very purpose. Tom was already on his porch. This time he'd brought 2 thick blankets and spread them on the ground near his chair. 2 thermoses sat beside the blankets, steam rising from their open tops. He looked up as they approached, showing no surprise. "Figured you might come back," he said. "Gets cold out here at night. Brought you something warm." Rix and Nyla settled onto the blankets. The fabric felt strange against their fur, soft and comfortable in a way their ship's metal floors never were. Tom poured hot liquid into 2 small bowls and set them within reach. The smell was odd but not unpleasant. Tom opened a different book tonight. The cover was even more worn than the first one. He cleared his throat and began to read. "If you can keep your head when all about you are losing theirs and blaming it on you." The rhythm hit Rix like a physical force. His 6 legs trembled. Every word seemed to vibrate through his bones, through his crystalline fur, through parts of his brain that had been sleeping his entire life. Through their neural link, images began to surface. Memories that couldn't be his own. Ancient things. Vex who looked like him but different, fuller somehow, more alive. They were creating structures that sang when the wind touched them. They were gathered in groups, making harmonic patterns that told stories. They were building, creating, living for something other than war. Nyla gasped audibly. She was seeing it too, feeling it. A past that belonged to their species before the engineering, before they'd been turned into weapons. A time when they'd been something else entirely. When Tom finished the poem, he poured water from 1 thermos into the bowls he'd set out. "Kipling," he said, his voice gentle. "He wrote that poem for soldiers. For people who had to stay strong when everything was falling apart. I figured you two might appreciate it." Rix approached the bowl slowly. His training screamed warnings, could be poisoned, could be a trap, could be anything. But something stronger than training pulled him forward. He drank. The water was cool and clean and tasted like nothing he'd ever experienced in his sterile ship. He made a decision in that moment. A decision that would crack his entire world apart. He activated his translator chip and spoke aloud, his harmonic frequencies converted into human words. "Again," he said, and even through the mechanical translation, his desperation came through. More word songs. Tom smiled, and there was something in that expression that Rix recognized from his surfacing memories. Kindness. Understanding. Things that had no place in a warrior's life. Tom opened his book to a new page. Robert Frost this time. He was good at writing about choices. And as Tom's voice rolled across the red dust under the full moon's light, 2 Vex scouts sat and listened and remembered what their species had lost 3,000 years ago. By the 4th night, Tom wasn't alone with just Rix and Nyla anymore. 6 more Vex emerged from the darkness, their crystalline fur glinting in the moonlight. They settled into a semicircle around his porch, silent and watchful. Tom had brought more blankets, more water. He'd known somehow that word was spreading. By the 7th night, 20 Vex filled his garden. The entire scout unit, Tom figured. They sat in perfect rows, their yellow eyes reflecting the full moon's light. His small homestead had become something else entirely. Something he couldn't quite name. Tom had spent his days doing homework. His old military access code still worked, much to his surprise. The Colonial Defense Force database was supposed to wipe credentials after retirement, but someone had been sloppy. Or maybe they figured an 84-year-old man wasn't much of a security risk. He'd read everything the CDF knew about the Vex. It wasn't much, but it was enough. The reports talked about their communication methods. Harmonic frequencies beyond human hearing range. Their language was built on vibration and resonance, mathematical precision turned into meaning. They didn't use words the way humans did. They used sound itself. That's when Tom understood what was happening in his garden every night. His poetry wasn't just words to them. The rhythm, the meter, the rise and fall of his voice, it was creating patterns they recognized on some deep level. It was music. The first music they'd heard in thousands of years. He changed his approach after that. Started choosing his material more carefully. He dug out books he hadn't touched in decades. War poets mostly. Men who'd seen combat and tried to make sense of it through verse. Wilfred Owen, who died in World War I. Siegfried Sassoon, who'd survived but carried the scars forever. These were poets who understood what it meant to be a soldier. Who knew the weight of following orders you didn't want to follow. Who remembered the people they'd been before the fighting started. Tom read slowly that night, letting each word carry across the garden. What passing bells for these who die as cattle? Only the monstrous anger of the guns. The reaction was immediate. The Vex crystalline fur began to vibrate, creating a soft chiming sound that filled the air. It was like standing inside a wind chime, every syllable he spoke causing ripples through their bodies. Nyla's ears flattened against her head. Rix's bright yellow eyes dimmed to amber, like embers dying in a fire. Around the circle, Tom could see something passing between them, that neural link the reports had mentioned. They were sharing something. Feeling something together. He kept reading. What candles may be held to speed them all? Not in the hands of boys, but in their eyes shall shine the holy glimmers of goodbyes. Some of the Vex were trembling now. Tom had seen that kind of shaking before, in young Marines after their first real combat. The moment when reality crashed through training and you realized what you'd actually done. What you'd become. The snap of a twig cut through the night like a gunshot. Every Vex head turned in perfect unison, their bodies tensing for action. Tom remained seated, though his heart kicked up a notch. He kept his hands visible, kept his breathing steady. The creature that emerged from the darkness was different from the scouts. Bigger. 7 feet tall at the shoulder, built like violence itself. His fur was black with silver streaks, and battle scars crossed all 6 of his legs in pale lines. His eyes locked onto Tom with the kind of focus that predators reserve for prey. This is the human who has compromised my unit? The voice came through a translator, but even the mechanical rendering couldn't hide the threat in it. This was Commander Vorn. Had to be. Tom set down his book carefully. Compromised is one word for it. I'd say enlightened, but that's just me being optimistic. He gestured to an empty spot in the circle. You're welcome to sit. I'm reading Maya Angelou tonight. Vorn took a step forward, his massive frame blocking out the moonlight. I will rip your... Still I rise, Tom began, his voice cutting through the threat like it was nothing. He didn't shout. Didn't need to. He just started reading, letting the words do their work. You may write me down in history with your bitter, twisted lies. You may trod me in the very dirt, but still, like dust, I rise. Vorn froze mid-step. Tom watched it happen, the commander's legs locked, his whole body going rigid. The frequency of the words, the pattern of the rhythm, it bypassed whatever conscious control Vorn had and went straight to something deeper. The big Vex eyes went wide. His crystalline fur started vibrating in complex patterns, faster and more intense than any of the scouts. Tom kept reading, his voice steady and sure. Does my sassiness upset you? Why are you beset with gloom? 'Cause I walk like I've got oil wells pumping in my living room? Through the commander's translator, Tom heard something that sounded like a gasp. Or maybe a sob. It was hard to tell with the mechanical voice doing the conversion. Vorn's legs gave out. The massive commander sank to the ground, his 6 legs folding beneath him. His head dropped, his ears flat against his skull. Around the circle, all 20 scouts were vibrating in harmony, their neural link glowing with shared emotion. Tom finished the poem. The last lines hung in the air like smoke. I rise. I rise. I rise. The silence that followed felt alive. Heavy. 21 Vex sat motionless under the full moons, their crystalline fur still chiming softly in the night breeze. Tom could see tears forming in some of their eyes, actual tears which the intelligence reports had said wasn't possible for their species. Finally, Commander Vorn spoke. His voice came through the translator as barely a whisper, broken and raw. Who were we? Tom looked at the massive warrior sitting in his garden, surrounded by his scouts, all of them trembling with the weight of remembering something they'd never known they'd lost. That, Tom said gently, is what we're going to figure out together. The power of poetry. The clock was ticking. In just 72 hours, a massive invasion fleet would reach Earth's newest colony. Commander Vorn knew he was running out of time, but he also knew he was onto something important. He sent regular reports back to High Command, telling them his scouts were still gathering information about the planet. It was technically true, though what they were really gathering was something far more valuable than military intelligence. While Vorn kept his superiors satisfied with routine updates, his scouts spent every night working alongside Tom. They weren't planning defenses or mapping weak points. They were learning something the Vex hadn't done in thousands of years. They were learning to express feelings through language. The situation was urgent enough that the main human colony sent help. Kate Morrison arrived first. She was a linguist, someone who studied how different species communicate. She didn't come alone. Her whole team followed close behind. There was Mike Chin, who specialized in alien sound patterns. Lisa Park brought her expertise in translation technology. And then there was Ben Rodriguez, the youngest member of the team. He just finished his training in xenolinguistics, the study of alien languages. This was his first real assignment, and it couldn't have been more important. They turned Tom's garden into an outdoor laboratory. Equipment appeared everywhere. Sensitive recording devices captured every sound the Vex made. Holographic displays floated in the air, showing complex wave patterns and frequency analyses. The team worked around the clock, documenting everything they learned. Kate made a breakthrough early on. As she studied the recordings, patterns emerged that amazed her. Their language structure is mathematical, she explained to the others, her fingers moving rapidly across the glowing displays. Everything they say is based on pure frequency ratios. It's incredibly precise, but it's also incredibly limited. She pulled up examples on the screens. Look at this. They can describe the exact dimensions of an object. They can calculate trajectories. They can communicate complex tactical information with perfect clarity. But they can't say something is beautiful. They have no word for sadness or joy or hope. Then Kate discovered something that changed everything. Poetry though, poetry is different. When they try to make poetry, they're adding emotional context to the mathematical framework. It's like they've been speaking a language with no adjectives for 3,000 years, and suddenly we're teaching them how to feel their own words again. This realization was huge. The Vex hadn't lost the ability to feel. They'd lost the ability to express those feelings through language. And once you can't express something, it becomes harder and harder to remember it even exists. Rix decided to be brave. He wanted to try creating a Vex poem. One night, he stood under the full moon, that strange satellite with its pockmarked surface. His crystalline fur began to vibrate. The vibrations weren't random. They formed complex harmonic patterns, waves of sound that overlapped and interacted in beautiful ways. The translation equipment struggled to make sense of it. The words came out choppy and disconnected. Silver light, ancient memory, warrior dreams, home. It was broken. The grammar didn't work. The structure was primitive compared to their normal mathematical precision. But here's the thing that mattered most. It was theirs. It came from somewhere deep inside Rix, from a place that had been silent for generations. Nyla watched Rix's attempt. She felt something stir inside her. The next night she tried her own poem. Then another scout tried. And another. Each attempt was different. Each one reached into memories that had been buried for centuries. Strange things started happening. As the Vex practiced expressing emotions through poetry, old memories began surfacing. They remembered being called something different before the word Vex existed. They remembered cities that didn't just stand silently. Their ancient cities had been designed to resonate, to sing with harmonic architecture that filled the air with beauty. They remembered a time before the endless wars. They remembered peace. Tom realized the Vex needed more than just poetry lessons. They needed to hear how other species expressed emotion through sound. He introduced them to human music, starting with simple songs that carried powerful feelings. He played Johnny Cash, whose deep voice sang about hardship and redemption. He played John Denver, whose gentle melodies spoke of mountains and home and belonging. The Vex absorbed every note. Their collective neural link, that connection that allowed them to share thoughts across their entire species, began buzzing with rediscovered emotions. Music was awakening something in them that had been sleeping for 3,000 years. The deadline kept approaching. The invasion fleet was coming, whether the Vex on the ground wanted it to or not. On the final night before those ships would arrive, Commander Vorn made a crucial decision. He approached Tom with a request that would determine the fate of both their species. "Help me write something," Vorn said. His translated voice carried a weight Tom had never heard before. "Something that will make them remember what I've remembered. I have one chance to stop this. Just one transmission before they arrive." Nobody slept that night. Tom and Kate worked alongside Mike, Lisa, and Ben. The 21 Vex scouts joined them. They were attempting something that had never existed before in all the galaxy's long history. They were creating a poem that existed in both languages simultaneously. Human words wrapped around Vex harmonic frequencies. Mathematical precision carried emotional weight. It was a bridge between species, built from sounds and feelings and rediscovered memories. Every line had to work in both languages. Every frequency had to resonate with meaning. When dawn broke over the colony, their work was finished. Commander Vorn took the transmission and sent it toward the incoming fleet on all possible frequencies. Then they waited. The invasion ships had been traveling for weeks. They were massive, heavily armed, carrying thousands of Vex warriors ready to conquer another world. They stopped 3 million kilometers from the planet. They just stopped. And everything changed. When everything changed, the massive Vex flagship appeared in orbit above the colony like a dark shadow blocking out the stars. Then it just hung there, silent, motionless. 6 hours passed with no communication, no movement, no attack. Down on the surface, every alarm was blaring. The Colonial Defense Force scrambled every available ship, expecting the worst. Pilots ran to their fighters. Ground troops took defensive positions. Everyone prepared for the invasion that seemed inevitable. Then something completely unexpected happened. A transmission came through from the flagship. The Vex weren't demanding surrender. They weren't issuing threats. They were requesting a meeting. Admiral Grace Henderson couldn't believe what she was reading. She'd spent 15 years fighting the Vex. She'd seen what they did to colonies. She'd watched good people die in their attacks. And now they wanted to talk? She didn't trust it for a second, but she also couldn't ignore it. She assembled a security detail, boarded a transport, and personally flew down to Tom's homestead. The meeting location itself was symbolic, though Grace didn't realize it at first. Commander Vorn waited in Tom's garden, the exact spot where everything had begun. Behind him, the full moon was rising over the horizon, casting its strange light across the red dust. Grace stepped off the transport with her hand near her weapon. Her security team fanned out, watching every shadow. Vorn moved forward slowly. His crystalline fur caught the moonlight, creating patterns of reflected light. When he spoke, his translator rendered the harmonic frequencies with unusual clarity. Every word came through perfectly. We wish to negotiate a cessation of hostilities. Grace's hand tightened near her sidearm. The anger in her voice was barely controlled. You've killed thousands of our people. You've destroyed 4 colonies. Entire communities wiped out. And now you want peace because some old man read you poetry? Vorn didn't flinch from her anger. He seemed to understand it, maybe even respect it. Not because of the poetry, he replied carefully. Because of what the poetry reminded us. We were made to be weapons. Engineered. Programmed. We forgot we could choose to be something else. This human showed us that choice still exists. Tom had been standing quietly to the side. Now he stepped forward, positioning himself between the 2 commanders. Admiral, they're not asking for forgiveness. They know what they've done. They're asking for a chance to rebuild what was taken from them 3,000 years ago. Their culture. Their identity. Their art and music and stories. Everything that made them more than just soldiers. Grace looked at Tom like he'd lost his mind. You're defending them? I'm telling you what I've learned, Tom said steadily. They're victims too. Victims of whoever engineered them into weapons and erased their history. That doesn't excuse what they've done. But it means there's a chance to stop future wars before they start. The negotiations that followed were tense and difficult. They stretched across 3 weeks of careful discussions. The entire Vex fleet remained in orbit, weapons powered down, making no aggressive moves. Colonial Defense Force ships surrounded them, watching for any sign of deception. One wrong move from either side could have triggered a massacre. Rix and Nyla became crucial to the process. They acted as cultural ambassadors, helping humans understand Vex history while simultaneously learning more about their own buried past. Every conversation revealed something new. Every shared memory brought more pieces of the puzzle together. The Colonial Defense Force remained deeply skeptical. Most military commanders wanted to use this opportunity to destroy the Vex fleet while it was vulnerable. They'd seen too much destruction to believe in sudden peace. The debate raged in government chambers and military briefings. How could you trust an enemy that had caused so much death? Kate and her team provided the evidence that slowly changed minds. They documented everything with scientific precision. Brain scans showed neurological changes in the Vex who'd been exposed to poetry and music. Dormant brain structures were activating, sections that had been suppressed by ancient genetic engineering. Creative thought patterns were emerging where only tactical calculations had existed before. Kate presented her findings to the Colonial Council in a session that would determine the future of both species. They're healing, she explained, showing scan after scan. From 3 millennia of trauma. Their entire species has been suffering from engineered psychological damage. And we can help them heal, or we can create an enemy that knows both how to kill and how to grieve what they've lost. Which do you think is more dangerous? The room fell silent as the council members considered her words. An enemy that could feel, that could understand loss, that could create art and poetry alongside battle strategies. Some saw hope in that combination. Others saw a nightmare. The vote came down to a single deciding voice. It passed. Barely. The peace treaty was signed with half the colony celebrating and the other half convinced they'd made a terrible mistake. 6 months changed everything. Tom's simple garden, where he'd once read poetry alone under alien moons, had transformed into something much bigger. The colonial government established a cultural exchange center on his property. The original garden still existed at its heart, but now buildings surrounded it. Libraries, performance spaces, recording studios, classrooms. Humans and Vex worked side by side in ways that would have seemed impossible a year earlier. They documented Vex history together, piecing together fragments of a culture that had been deliberately erased. They recreated lost Vex arts, using old mathematical patterns to rebuild ancient harmonic sculptures. They taught each other their languages, finding beauty in the differences. Young Ben Rodriguez found his calling in this new world. He specialized in Vex harmonic poetry, creating fusion works that combined human emotional expression with Vex mathematical precision. His compositions topped music charts across both species. Teenagers from both races learned his songs. His first album went platinum in 3-star systems. Tom still maintained his nightly routine. Every evening as the sun set and the moons rose, he'd settle into his chair with a book. But his audience had grown considerably. 50 Vex typically attended now, their crystalline fur creating a field of reflected moonlight. 24 human colonists joined them regularly. And surprisingly, Admiral Grace Henderson had become one of the most faithful attendees. She developed an unexpected appreciation for Robert Frost. Something about those poems about walls and roads and choices resonated with her. One evening she stayed after the reading ended. Most of the crowd had dispersed, heading home under the twin moons. "You changed the course of a war with poetry," she told Tom, shaking her head in amazement. "Military historians are going to study this for centuries. They'll write books about the battle that never happened." Tom chuckled, reaching over to scratch Rick's behind his twitching ears. The gesture had become habitual over the months. "I didn't change anything, Grace. Just reminded some folks that everyone's got a song in them, even if they forgot how to sing it." Nyla, who'd been listening quietly, hummed a harmonic pattern. The vibrations carried across the garden. The translator processed the complex frequencies and rendered them as words. The old warrior taught warriors to be more than war. Tom's weathered face broke into a genuine grin. "That's pretty good, Nyla. You should write that one down. Might be the start of your first real poem." The twin moons climbed higher in the sky, Kepler 442b's moon and the full moon moving in their eternal dance. They cast their combined glow over the red dust of this strange world that had become home to two very different species. Tom opened his book to a new page. Both humans and Vex settled in to listen, the evening's entertainment just beginning. Tom had survived 3 wars by being a good soldier. He'd fought when fighting was necessary. He'd followed orders and protected his people. But he'd ended a 4th war by doing something completely different. By simply remembering that everyone, whether human or alien, whether soldier or civilian, needed to hear that they could be more than what they'd been made to be. The greatest weapon wasn't always the biggest gun or the fastest ship. Sometimes it was reminding monsters they'd never been monsters at all. Just people who'd forgotten their poetry.